Hey guys, it's Destiny, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over the basics of combat in Honkai Star Rail. And without further ado, let's get straight into it. So to begin with Honkai Star Rail, I would like to mention, first of all, the game is turn-based. I'm not too sure how many people know that. I would assume that everyone who is looking into the game does know that, but I just thought I'd point that out. And I'm going to actually begin with the pre-combat. What are things you could do before you actually get into the fight? So one thing you can actually do before you get into the fight is your technique. What a technique is basically something that you can do prior to the fight where you can get a bonus once you begin battle. For example, a character like March 7th's technique is able to basically freeze a random enemy right as you commence battle. A lot of other characters have techniques where they're able to attack the enemies immediately when battle commences, or they're able to heal your allies, whatever it may be. But for the example of March 7th, she's able to freeze a random enemy. So you use a technique, and her technique needs to hit the enemy. Some techniques don't actually have to hit the enemy, they're just a buff. Such as Bronya, I believe you just have to use a technique and you get the buff. But for characters like March 7th, you need the technique to actually hit the enemy. Of course, this type of stuff is typically specified in the techniques of the characters. You can start up to 3 initially technique charges. Technique charges can be restored by breaking purple containers in the overworld, and breaking one of these containers will restore 2 technique charges. These containers can be found near fast travel points in the game, and they are also outside of the city zones in the game. Combat can be initiated when an enemy is also chasing you and manages to catch up with you, so if you fail to hit them with either your basic attack or your technique ability before they come in contact with you, then you will enter combat in an ambush state, and in this state, the enemy will get to attack before you can attack. This is incredibly similar to a game like Persona 5. If you go up to the enemy and you ambush them first, you'll be able to take advantage of that, and typically you can attack before them, or they get hurt, whatever it may be. And in the same way, if they approach you and attack you first, you will be in that ambush-like state where they get to attack before you, and that can really suck in the case of you not being fully healed up, or you just weren't prepared to be attacked first. So those are some things to keep in mind in the pre-combat of the game. Now let's get into the combat once you commence battle. Additionally, if this video is helping you out so far, make sure to hit the subscribe button and let's carry on. There are a few moves to note in battle. So basically, your characters can do a basic attack, a skill, and an ultimate. Also, all characters have a talent, which typically their talent is something that is added on to their kit that assists them in battle. Whether it's extra damage, extra healing, extra buffs, it could be any of that. So, to use your basic attack is just a button, you just basic attack, and there you go. But then when you use your skill, using a skill consumes skill points. Skill points can be generated primarily by using that basic attack ability. You can hold a maximum of 5 skill points, and they are shared between the whole team. But you cannot activate your skill if you do not have any skill points. Skill point usage in this game is incredibly important, as it will really lie with your team's synergy and your overall team comp. An example I can give for this is Seele. Since she is our first limited banner, I will be using her as the example here. Seele is a very skill-hungry character. She wants to use her skill as much as possible to get her ultimate as fast as possible, and also be able to trigger Resurgence, which allows her to attack again if she defeats the enemy. Skills typically do way more damage than basic attacks, so with Seele, you'll want to use her skill, as then she'll be able to possibly defeat whatever little minions on the field are enemy, and then you can trigger Resurgence, be able to go again, and if you have enough energy recharge on her, or she generates enough energy from doing this, then you'll be able to get your ultimate, and when you use your ultimate, her skill actually can get reset, and it only resets for her. That is a key thing to keep in mind, and when I talk about ultimates, I'll go a little more in depth with that, but that's a key thing to keep in mind, is that when you use your ultimate, the turn resets for you, which means Seele can technically use Resurgence again if her ultimate kills an enemy on the field. She does that, then she triggers Resurgence again, which means she can attack once again, which essentially means she can attack practically 4 times in a row without the assistance of anybody else but herself. If you have a character like Bronya, you can practically do that once again, since Bronya can advance the turn of an ally, which means that seele will be able to attack again. So it's really, really good. But the issue with skill points, once again, is seele wants as much skill points as possible. If you do the thing that I just said, where you do your skill, do another skill, do your ultimate, and then another skill, you're practically using 3 of your 5 skill points. So you really have to manage your skill points, and when you're in a fight, you have to heavily consider, okay, which characters are going to be using their skills? Do I have some characters that are fine with using their basic attacks in order to generate skill points? Whatever it may be. Now for the ultimates. Ultimate abilities cost a certain amount of energy to activate. For every character, it's different. Some characters may be 100, maybe 120, 110, whatever it may be. Energy can be gained by the following actions: basic attacks, skills, using the ultimate, defeating enemies, and also some characters and light cones are able to give you effects that have more energy regeneration and be able to allow you to get your ultimate faster. Ultimates are typically just used to reset the turn of your character. Some characters could take advantage of this, some can't really. Characters like seele and xuan are able to take advantage of this heavily, since xuan is actually able to attack immediately again after using her ultimate, as that is built into her kit. So it really depends on what character it is, since some characters can take advantage of the turn reset just for themselves with the ultimate, but most of the time the ultimate is just a good amount of extra damage, or it's a good buff or good healing. Now for the enemy side of things. Enemies have 2 health bars in a way. The top bar is the weakness meter bar, or their toughness bar, which is the white bar. You can kind of think of it as sort of like a shield. It's not really a shield, but you need to break this bar before you can actually do damage, or a good amount of damage, to their HP stat. The HP bar is the red bar and represents how much damage they can take before falling in combat, and the HP bar goes down whenever a unit takes damage. So basically, enemies have 2 health bars, and then once you break that toughness meter bar, you'll be able to do way more damage to the actual enemy's HP bar in order to defeat them. Another thing to mention though is that the toughness bar is really hard to break unless you have an ally who has an element that is really good against the enemy. So if the enemy is weak to ice, you'll want to use ice characters to break that enemy's toughness meter. It's really hard to break this meter if you do not have any characters on your team that are super effective essentially against the enemy. Think of it like Pokemon real quick, where basically you're using a water type against a fire type, then you're breaking their toughness meter faster. But if you're using a grass type against a fire type, which in that instance would be you're not using a character that has their element super effective against the enemy, you don't really get anywhere with that. So you really want to make sure you have a character on your team that is super effective against the enemy. And if you do not, I would just recommend maybe swapping a character out on your team real quick, just to be able to ensure you do have that to your advantage. As I've mentioned though, enemies do have sets of elemental weaknesses. They generally have 3, which are displayed above their head. And basically enemies have these weaknesses mainly in reference to the toughness meter bar. That's mainly why weaknesses exist in the game for the enemies. There are weakness break effects, which mean that when you break the enemy's toughness meter, as I've been mentioning, that white bar, there are effects for each element. So for physical, it is bleed, which means you'll deal additional physical damage and apply a bleed effect, which is physical damage over time, which means each time that enemy's turn goes by, they will be taking tick damage and it'll be like physical damage. For fire, it is burn. So you deal additional fire damage and you apply the burn effect, which is fire damage over time. Same rules apply as physical. A lot of these will apply damage over time. For ice, it is frozen. You freeze the enemy for preventing it from taking any actions, and you apply an ice damage over time, and they take damage for the longer they are frozen. For lightning, it is shock. You deal additional damage and apply the shock effect. It is just lightning damage over time. For wind, it's wind shear. Deal additional wind damage, apply wind shear effect, which is damage over time. Now, quantum and imaginary have different effects. Quantum has entanglement. Applying the entanglement effect pushes the enemy back in turn order and also deals quantum damage over time. This is really good because if an enemy is really fast, you're able to push them back with entanglement. So characters like seele, silverwolf, and so on can take really good advantage of breaking the enemy's toughness meter in order to do entanglement. Now for imaginary, there is imprisonment. Applying imprisonment effect pushes the enemy back in turn order once again and reduces the enemy's speed. So characters like Welt are able to do imprisonment And Welt's kit already allows him to mess with the enemy's speed a lot, but if Welt is the one breaking the weakness meter, he's doing even more, pushing that enemy back in turn order and reducing their speed. So he's really good at making sure the enemy takes forever to basically have their turn. While the enemy's toughness meter is broken, the toughness meter will remain at 0, and further attacks of an element that the enemy is weak to will have no additional effects on it. But a broken enemy will recover from its broken state on the next turn. Its toughness meter will also be replenished back to full, and it can be weakness broken again. So essentially what ends up happening is when you break the toughness meter of an enemy, they will take a turn. Let's say they only move once per turn. They will take that turn of theirs in order to recover their toughness meter. Now, some enemies actually attack twice, which this does kind of suck in the case of they do attack twice. If they attack twice, they'll spend the first turn recovering the toughness meter, and then they'll attack you like normal. The good thing is with this, though, is that all enemies are AI controlled, which means if you can get down their attack patterns, then that'll be really beneficial. There are certain characters that have charging moves where they charge up. The game recommends that you break their toughness meter so they don't attack you with this really high damage dealing attack. The reason why this is because they'll charge up for a turn, then they'll immediately hit you with that and it'll do a lot of damage and you could possibly lose the fight. When enemies like this exist or you are fighting them, what you really want to do is don't break their toughness meter until they start to charge. Once they start to charge and their toughness meter is practically gone, you break it and you take full advantage of that. You will want your first character in line to break it so that all the other characters in line that are on your team are able to do as much damage as possible to this enemy. That's just a general tip I have for you guys if you notice that enemies do have an attack pattern where they'll charge. Not all enemies charge, and of course every enemy is different in how they operate, but that is a little general tip you want to keep in mind, which is mainly comes down to the RPG elements of this game. I know a lot of people think that it's possibly more gacha than RPG, but in my opinion, I actually think it's more turn-based RPG than gacha, since there are so many of these things that you do need to keep in mind with combat. And I know this video is a bit longer, but I did genuinely go over practically everything I feel like you would need to know about this. Now let's just go over post-battle real quick. Your HP loss remains the same, which means you'll just have to go to a healing statue or use outside of battle items, and items are actually not allowed in battle. So the only things allowed in battle is your characters. That's all you can use to win a fight, and items can only be used outside of battle, which means you really have to focus on your team's synergy in order to defeat things in this game. I know a lot of traditional RPGs allow you to use items in battle, but nope, not this game. You'll have to heavily focus once again on that team synergy, which I will be releasing a team building guide this week as well, so you guys have an idea of how you want to build teams. I did go over the skill point thing though, which will be a major point in the other video as well, as that is very, very important. But I do hope this video helped you guys out. I know once again it is a bit longer, but I practically went over everything I feel like you should know about combat, and I hope this video helped you understand what you need to know about combat. Also, if you did enjoy the video, before you leave, make sure to hit the subscribe button for more StarL guides and content, as I plan to dish out a bunch of it for you guys. I hope you all have a nice one. Peace.